beautiful people. My name is Emma.
And I'm MC.
And we are your hosts of the G-Forces podcast. So this past weekend was the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix, or the Imola Grand Prix, whichever you want to call them. In the past, it was called the San Marino Grand Prix.
One of the two Italian Grand Prix.
Yes. Imola is apparently a city within the Emilia Romagna big city. I'm more thinking that Imola is a region within Emilia Romagna. That's what it was looking like. And then they're in the Bologna region, or it's the other way. It's in the city of Bologna in the Emilia Romagna region. I don't know. I looked it up, and they both called Imola and Emilia Romagna or Bologna a city, and then they called one of them a region. I'm a little confused by it all. And San Marino is also a tiny little region right next to it, like bordering it all.
You know, I'm not up to date on my specific regions of Italy.
I went a little deep into it, trying to figure it out.
Yeah, it's like I don't really have any knowledge to give you at this point.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add to it, honestly. I'm sorry for confusing everyone if nobody else cares exactly where it was. But it was an okay race until the very end. It was great in the last 10 laps, I'd say.
Yeah, I think it wasn't terrible. It wasn't boring, but I do think the last 10 minutes were probably, like, the most heart-pumping.
Yeah, I'd say the majority of the race was your average race.
Yeah.
Nothing crazy.
A lot of pit strategy, tire,
a lot of just passing
issues,
people trying to get back after you pit. And this weekend, there were a lot of teams that brought upgrades, so most of the practice sessions were trying to figure all of that out. And then on top of it, this weekend, there was a whole thing for, like, a run for Senna and Ratzenberger. So if you did not listen to our last episode, we talked about how it has been 30 years since Ayrton Senna, and we didn't talk about Roland Ratzenberger, which we should have. We did?
I mentioned it, yeah.
Okay. Well, both of them passed 30 years ago at this racetrack, and so they did a whole dedication to them. So Sebastian Vettel, a former F1 driver, came and organized like a run for them around the track and invited all the F1, F2, F3 people to run, and any F1 like personnel. And then this morning, actually, so today is Sunday, the race was this morning, I believe it was right before the driver's parade, was when Sebastian Vettel got into Ayrton Senna's 1993 McLaren F1 car and actually did a lap around the track and did some donuts.
I don't know if he did it once or twice, but I know he did it, I think he did it twice this weekend.
Maybe.
Yeah, but
I've only seen the videos of it, so I don't know if it was once or twice.
Yeah, I don't know the schedule.
But a lot of people were actually really, I think people are a bit soppy online sometimes, because people were like Seb finishing what Senna couldn't.
Oh, Jesus Christ. I mean, I think, too, though, like, for Seb and the drivers, I mean, it's obviously, like, a really important part of history, but I also think it's a car, I mean, noise, like, the sound alone.
The old cars are insane.
Yeah, it's very different, so I think it's also just cool for the spectator to see.
100%.
And it's so easy to see the drastic differences in the car, but
they look so different to today's car.
Yeah. But I think too it's just, you know, it's a very emotional weekend.
Yes.
As well. Not only because of the Senna tributes, but also, you know, this region in Italy. This race was canceled last year because of really severe floods. And so I think it was really nice to see, like, the beauty of the Tifosi, to see, you know, the people of, you know, Imola really come out.
And that was kind of a note on the trophy. So the trophy for this weekend, on the back of it had, like, a circle of every single person who has won at this racetrack for F1. And then for 2023... because the race was canceled, instead of a driver winning it, they put the people of Emilia Romagna. So it's a nice nod to all the people that were affected last year with those floods. I think we can just get into it then.
As we do every race weekend, let's go over the track details. So the official race name,
It is the longest race in all of F1. Race name, not race.
Go look it up because it has Italian, and I'm so bad at Italian.
Do you want me to try it?
If you want to, let make you suffer.
Okay.
Because I've done some horrible pronunciations.
Formula
on
One
this.
MSC Cruises Gran Premio del Made
Okay.
del Made in Italy.
In Italy.
I don't know how to say that, man.
Emilia Romagna, 2024.
It's the del. The double L. I'm thinking of it in Spanish terms, so it's like de, but I think in Italian it's del.
I just like how you go Gran Premio del Made in Italy.
I mean that's in English, and I have an American accent.
Maybe it's Del Mare.
It could be del Mare, but there's no accent.
Okay,
Are there accents on Italian words like Spanish?
I didn't take Italian in high school. Anyways, this is not the point of this segment, Emma. Jesus. All right. The track name is the Autodromo Enzo Edino Ferrari, a.k.a. Imola. So a lot of people will call this track Imola. I honestly think it just has so many names.
Most people will not even call it the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix. I feel like if you're just casually speaking about it, it's the Imola Grand Prix.
Yeah, that's kind of how I've referred to it in all my notes, because I feel like that was the easiest.
Yeah.
So the first F1 Grand Prix was hosted in 1980, and the circuit length is 4.909 kilometers or 3.05 miles. I will say that the track times are significantly faster than we've seen. I believe it's about 10 to 15 seconds faster. I feel like this and Monza, the two Italian tracks that we'll see this season, are just known for speed.
Yeah. Monza especially, the tempo speed.
So the number of laps they completed this weekend was 63, and the total race distance was 309.049 kilometers, or 192.03 miles. The lap record for this circuit was placed by Lewis Hamilton in 2020 in a Mercedes, and he did a lap in 1 minute and 15.484 seconds. So, pretty fast. Racing has been going on here since 1953, so while they did only host starting in 1980, there has been race. I believe the track broke ground in 1950, so it is one of the historical ones. This was also the first of what they deem the European leg of the F1 schedule.
And the actual setup of the track has changed over time.
I was about to...
Oh, perfect.
Yeah.
Great minds think alike.
So this was called the San Marino Grand Prix, which was held from 1980 to 2006. And then from what I read, there was just some track updates and pit lane issues. Like we've seen with some of the older tracks, they just needed updates. So it returned as the Emilia Romagna Grand Prix in 2020. So there was a period of time where there wasn't a race happening.
Now this makes so much... One of the things that I was going to mention is how Hulkenberg has apparently never raced there before this weekend, and now that makes so much sense.
Yeah.
Because they didn't have it last year, and last year was the first year he had been racing in a few years because he got, I think somebody took one of his seats somewhere in 2019, and so then he hasn't raced since then. So now it makes sense why he's never been at Imola, because his entire career they just didn't race there.
Yeah.
Now, oh my gosh, I was so confused with the entire weekend. They kept being like, Hulkenberg is a rookie at this track. I'm like, what?
Yeah, we can, but obviously I should know
sense.
this. So the last thing, which I believe is what Emma wanted to talk about earlier, was after the 1994 Grand Prix, which was unfortunately the passing of Senna and Ratzenberg. Is it Berger?
I think it's Ratzenberg.
Ratzenberger. After the 1994 Grand Prix, this circuit was changed. So Tamburello, which is the corner, the turn that Senna passed on, and Villeneuve were Villeneuve.
Yes.
This is again why I don't pronounce things. Villeneuve.
Oh, they've just it's a name that's been said in motorsports many times, and the track in Montreal is named after that person.
In my defense, I didn't pay attention to Canada last year.
No, Canada was the first race that I watched live.
Yeah. Well, anyways, what I was trying to say was that these turns were deemed way too dangerous, and they were redesigned into what they are today, which is 2 chicanes. So, basically, really what we've talked about before, the beginning of safety measures really changing within Formula One.
Well, and some of the fun things that were changed this year that were added to the track were a ton of gravel traps.
Yes.
So there was gravel at basically like the track limits on so many of the turns. So if you were not really tight with your lines, you were going to have like an inch of a tire in the gravel, and as we saw at the Chinese Grand Prix, that it's going to catch you and it could completely spin you out. And it made for a very interesting race, practice sessions qualifying, I think, because the franticness of them to get the things done fast, but also you have to do it correctly, added a layer of stress. And practice and qualifying, I feel like, was chaos.
Well, I also feel like track limits have been a constant issue throughout all of F1. I mean, since what we've seen, just what we've read, I feel like the gravel does make track limits really interesting in certain corners because it adds this kind of like riskiness, and it does. I mean, it makes hitting the gravel. It feels like a significantly bigger deal than hitting a little bit of grass.
Yeah, 100%.
So that's all I have on track info and race info. Other than that, we forgot to mention before this segment that Alex Albon announced his contract extension with Williams.
Yes.
So
we don't know for how long, because nobody likes to tell anyone how long they're going to stay at the team anymore. But his contract was supposed to end at the end of 2025. So I'm guessing it was through the end of 2027 or 2028.
Okay. Yeah. I feel like the internet was really mixed. I mean, I'm happy, obviously, to see him on the grid. And
you had people that were like Jolyon Palmer, who... We have mixed feelings about Jolyon sometimes, because sometimes it's like, okay, that's a good take, and then other times it's like, what are you saying, man? Just, like, stop hating on this person. He was like, I just don't understand why Alex Albon would make this safe decision. Like, is it a financial reason, or are you just not ready to go into one of these bigger teams? Like, why would you not try to do that? And I'm just like, A, where would he go? B, why would he want to go back to a Red Bull when he had a horrible experience? And the other option would be like Mercedes, and his best friend races for Mercedes, and that we've seen best friends racing for Mercedes before, and it has ended poorly. And he is a leader at Williams. Why would he leave when he's their number one driver? He is a leader just in general within the team, and the team is only just in the last year starting to kind of get their shit together.
Well, I think that's what he's kind of talked about, and something that all of Williams has always pushed is, like, we're not looking at, like, today and tomorrow. We're looking at 2 to 3 years.
Yeah, they're definitely not looking at today and tomorrow.
Oh, my God, I know. But I wonder, too, if there is this kind of... And I don't know the driver's involvement with all the changes in the 2026 regulations, but I wonder, too, if there's, like, collaboration or just kind of like the ability to grow with the car.
I think that's what it is.
And, I feel like next season, is going to be interesting, but I do think like 2026, so many things are expected to change that I feel like a few of the drivers, I'm not surprised they signed extensions to kind of just get through the regulation
changes.
I
think that's also like, so we've talked a lot about the younger drivers and how there's so many young drivers waiting to get into F1 and how so many of the other teams have driver academies with the younger drivers waiting. Williams driver academy is on the newer end. We don't even know who they're going to put in Logan Sargent's seat because their drivers are so young in the driver academy. Who the hell would take Alex Albon's spot?
Yeah, I also wonder, too, if it's kind of what, like, we saw with McLaren, where it was, like, there's so much movement happening that it's, like, maybe it's not the right opportunity.
Yeah.
Obviously, we don't know what goes into these decisions. This is all just speculation, but I personally am happy to obviously see Alex just continue on the grid.
I agree.
I believe in Williams. I think they're going to get there.
We're Williams fans to the day we die.
They're going to get there. I believe in it.
The last thing that I wanted to mention that we forgot to earlier was that Charles has a new race engineer. His old one, Zabi, was... I don't know if he was moved to somewhere else in the team or if he was let go. But a lot of people have had issues with Xavi in the past and the way that
I didn't know this.
Yeah, people last year were like rooting for his downfall because of his poor strategy with Charles.
I do remember just being frustrated, but I didn't know if that was like something you could like pin
Or if it was like
on.
a team thing, or if it was just that race engineer.
I always felt it was more of a team thing because my biggest frustration with Ferrari's strategy last season was the fact that it felt like they were never communicating to both drivers at the same time. Like they were like, like they were never clear.
Yeah.
And so I don't know if I necessarily would blame that on like the race engineer.
Yeah, but I mean, ever since Fred has gotten there, it's kind of been a whole big change of a lot of different positions.
I also think it's interesting, to my knowledge, this is now the second race engineer, the second driver. I mean, Valtteri Bottas last week, or 2 weeks ago in Miami, and now Charles.
What's going on with the race engineers?
Well, I also wonder, too, there's so many people getting involved in this sport now. I wonder if there's just, like, a bigger market for people in this profession.
Maybe.
I don't know.
All right. Well, we are going to get into all the free practice sessions. The main thing that we were talking about before this, when we were mentioning the gravel, is that everybody was just struggling with track limits in the in all of the free practice sessions.
Well, I also think the heat. The heat was messing people's tires up, and so I think
Apparently it hasn't been as hot there. Like, in the past, it's been a little bit chillier.
But I think Max Verstappen, I feel like, is victim number one of the tires this weekend.
Yeah.
At least to his comments. So I feel like the tires on top of the gravel, it was a slippery one.
Yeah, we watched all of the sessions, but we didn't take notes during them, and I was rewatching the highlights as I was writing some notes down. And in the free practice 1 highlights, it was just every 2 seconds, it was like Alex Jacks being like, and Carlos in the gravel, and Lewis Hamilton in the gravel. Like, it was like every single person had just gone into the gravel, and they were spinning out, and people's like new upgrades were getting all messed up.
I know.
And nobody could actually get a proper read on what was actually going on. And then also, to top it all off, Alex Albon's car just lost power.
Yeah, 20 minutes in, he just pulled off track.
Yeah, it was weird. I think it was an electrical issue.
I mean...
Because then they asked... Because Logan started to have some weird power problem. And they asked him if it was like the same thing that Alex was going through. And they figured out that it wasn't. But for FP2, both of them started in the garage. And they didn't come out for a while. Because their mechanics were still working on the cars.
Yeah, well, and that's the other thing. I think a lot of the mechanics were working on a lot of cars this weekend because even in certain sections of qualifying, I mean, people didn't come out for a while. There were a lot of changes. One thing I also wanted to mention was Ollie Behrman was on track in Kevin Magnussen's car, so K-Mag wasn't an FP1. And Ollie, this is the first of 6 practice sessions he'll be in, so we'll see him a little bit more.
He's in 6?
I believe so.
How is that? I guess you just have to do at least 2.
What I read online was completed his first of 6 FP1 sessions. So I'll look into it more.
Like, I know that each driver, like, each car has to give up their car for an FP1 at some point in the season, but 6 is...
It's just what it said online. I'll look into it.
Maybe he's not just doing it with Haas.
Yeah, I don't know.
Maybe he's also doing it with Ferrari.
I don't have more info on that one, so...
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Now I'm, like, contemplating that I just gave the whole world... Well, not the whole world, sorry. Handful of listeners.
Free practice 2. Fernando Alonso and Max Verstappen were not Lewis Hamilton's biggest fans. I guess Lewis's race engineer, Bono, did not give him a heads up that both Max and Fernando were coming up behind him, and then he ended up kind of impeding them. And Fernando was really irritated, and you could hear it on his radio, and Max was as well. But Lewis, on the next lap around, pulled around and was like, I'm so sorry. Like, that was not my intention.
I think they asked Max about it, too. And Max was like, I'm not going to like, who cares?
I weirdly think Max is emotionally mature in the sense that he does not hold grudges.
I mean, I would be shocked. Like, I feel like,
What's the point?
yeah, I feel like they're all, there's too much shit going on.
I'm
in
too
their
petty
lives,
for that.
But, the only thing I have is that Max was really struggling with tire grip in the first and the second session. So it made for an interesting top three at the end of FP2, which ended up being Charles at the fastest time, Oscar in second, and Yuki in third.
Yuki for the win.
And yeah, Checo and Max just could not find the time.
Checo the whole weekend could not find the time.
Yeah, this is the beginning of the struggle.
Yeah. FP3, the main thing was Fernando Alonso, MC.
Well, before we get to Fernando Alonso, because this still deals with the Red Bulls, I just wanted to talk about, before FP3, balance was an issue for both Red Bulls, so I don't know if this is what is causing the tire issues, but Max and Checo both had overnight setup changes to the RB20. So I thought that was interesting, especially obviously based off of, Max's race performance. Like, obviously things improved compared to the first two sessions. And then, Fernando Alonso, 35 minutes left of the session, crashed into the barrier pretty hard.
Yeah.
He was fine, no problem, but red flags were raised and they had to remove the car. I feel like it's kind of that moment where it's, like, a negative and a positive. It's, like, a negative, obviously, the car's in the state that it is, and they have qualifying in a few hours. But it's, like, thank God it's not a sprint weekend, but the car is pretty messed up.
Yeah.
So that happened, and then with about halfway left, so it took them about 5 minutes, drivers were given the green, and then with about 5 minutes left, Checo hits the wall at turn 15, raising additional red flags, and then the session resumed with only 2 minutes left, and everyone flew out. But
what was the point of going out at that point? You get 2 whole laps.
I think
stars.
Practice starts are just like a flying lap,
Yeah.
but Oscar ended up in pole. Well, not pole.
Yes, like, Oscar and Lando.
Yeah, they ended up in top. So
not too mad about that one.
Yeah, obviously it's just practice, but always nice.
Yeah.
So that's all I really have. I feel like a big issue that has been a consistent issue in a lot of practices has been the wind. I don't know if this is just an always F1 issue or if this is just as the cars have gotten lighter and like the material that they've made, it's a bigger issue, or I don't know. But wind was a consistent issue in all of the practice sessions. And then Red Bull, I don't want to say like it's the fall of Red Bull that we're watching.
Max still won the race.
But I do think that this is just showing the improvements that the other teams are bringing, that they're able, that Red Bull doesn't seem to be improving in the best ways.
Yeah.
They don't, it doesn't seem like they're hitting every nail on the head.
I'd agree.
So that's just practice.
Okay, qualifying. So the Aston Martin garage was able to repair Fernando Alonso's car in time for qualifying, but it was repaired for about how many minutes? And then he went off track. He didn't crash again.
He just hit the gravel.
But that can damage your floor.
Yeah, no, I know that. But it wasn't a wall, it was just gravel. I don't actually have the timing of when he hit the gravel.
But he ended up in P20, I think.
Yeah.
No, P19.
No, he was 19, and then he ended up having to start from the pit lane, but we'll get into that in the race. I will say, I think it is the worst performance of Alonso this season.
Something I feel like people are not talking about is what the hell is happening to Aston. I know that last season they started off really well, and then they started to struggle, but struggle for them meant midfield-ish. They're not doing well at all.
They're still midfield. Lance is still coming in.
Sometimes.
I do think the car, but again, I hate that I didn't watch the first half of, I should have watched the first half in winter of last season. I'm curious if the car fell off this fast.
Well, because the first race of the season, wasn't Fernando on the podium?
I'd have to look back on my notes, but Fernando, was doing well. Like, he was up there, he was racing, he was fighting.
Something's going on with because I feel like Fernando has been really struggling for himself.
Well, I don't know if, like, it's him or if they're just making updates to the car that just are not.
Or they're not making upgrades to the car.
Yeah. I'm not sure what's happening on that front.
But yeah, thought that was a little strange.
Yeah, so halfway through this session, Oscar was on top of the times, and then Lando eventually bumped him for first. We did see, I didn't even realize this happened, but we did see Alex Albon improve to 12th. There was a moment where we weren't sure if he was going to get eliminated. But I didn't realize that Logan's time had got deleted. I mean, he didn't, not saying that he put in a great time, no offense, but, like, I didn't realize that he put no time in, so that really affected.
I think it was deleted at the very end.
It was deleted at the end, like, so
like,
quickly.
he was already gonna be out in Q1, but I think it was deleted, like, at the end when people were starting to pull into the pit. The other thing that I have written down for it is that the V-carbs. So Yuki ended up getting P3 in Q1.
Oh, yeah?
Yeah. And Danny Rick, I didn't write down exactly what spot he got, and I think it was P7 or something like that, but they were doing phenomenally.
I have been surprisingly impressed with the V-carbs just based off of AlphaTauri's performance last year.
The V-carbs right now are doing what Williams was doing last year, I feel like. Their performance is what Williams was last year.
Maybe Alex's.
Yeah. By Williams, I mean Alex. I'm sorry, but Logan Sargent's was not.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I just feel like, I mean, obviously there's the issue that no one seems to talk about, the fact that it has a relationship with Red Bull that it does. But I will say, I don't even want to say I'm surprised anymore. I'm constantly impressed by Yuki's, like...
Yuki's very consistent in his performance.
And I feel like when the team needs something, he's willing to,
he pulls through.
He gets it. So I do feel like the V-carbs have improved further than anyone. And I feel like, yeah, not a lot of people are really stressing on it.
Yeah, I feel like people are shocked when they do really well.
Yeah.
But, I mean, I am shocked that Yuki was able to get up to P3. Like, that is really shocking.
Yeah.
But for them to get anywhere between, like, 7th and 13th.
Top 10.
7th to 13th makes sense to me.
Yeah. I don't have much more for Q1. Do you have anything else?
That's all I have for Q1.
So knocked out that session was Valtteri Bottas, Zhou, Kevin Magnussen, Fernando Alonso, and Logan Sargent. Honestly, Kevin Magnussen, I'm not sure if this was just a Haas weekend or if this is what we're going to see for K-Mag for the next few weekends due to his penalty issue.
Well, and someone else got a penalty because of him.
Well, yeah, we'll get to that.
We'll get to that.
But for those that aren't aware, Kevin Magnussen currently has 10 points on his super license, and to get banned from a race, you need 12 points.
Yeah, so he's only 2 penalties away from getting banned from a race, and at that point, obviously they would have to have a reserve driver step in or whatever. But those points are on his super license for an entire year. So I think we talked about it last time. I think he's going to have a hard time getting re-signed or signed anywhere.
I think he is, and I think we're going to see a lot of him in the upper teens placing. I think he's
I think he has.
I think it's gonna be
the
clean, tight races, and
yeah.
And then in Q2, the only note that I have is that the upset of the session was that Checo could just not get a strong enough time,
and Daniel Ricciardo ended up kicking him out.
Yeah, so Checo just could not achieve the time needed out of the elimination zone, and I mean Checo has consistently not been as strong as Max, but I feel like this weekend...
one's been as strong as Max.
Well, yeah. But I feel like this weekend was especially difficult for Checo and his car.
Yeah, he said something interesting after the race that I was reading. It was something about how, like, these old tracks are difficult to pass on, so they're difficult to race. But on the contrary, his teammate Max was saying, like, these are my favorite kinds of tracks. I wish every track was like this because it makes it interesting that, like, the gravel traps make it so much more fun because you gotta keep your shit together the whole time.
I mean, everyone has their preference, right?
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. And then who got out in Q2?
So Q2, Checo got out, Esteban Ocon, Lance Stroll, Alex Albon, and Pierre Gasly. So nice to see Pierre in Q2 because I feel like Alpine is slowly improving. And also nice to see. Oh no, just kidding. Never mind.
Q3.
Q3. The only thing I have is that Danny didn't really like go out.
Yeah, it took him like a few minutes to actually go out.
He only really just did a few flying laps, so I'm not sure what the strategy was there.
I think they kind of assumed that they weren't gonna move up too much, and
so it was like, why waste the tires?
Yeah.
And then Oscar was able to move past Lando and ended up placing second on the grid, which was very exciting. Short-lived, but very exciting.
Yeah, so he ended up getting a 3-place grid penalty because he had impeded Kevin Magnussen in Q1. And this was one of the good takes that Jolyon Palmer had. Jolyon was very angry at McLaren because that's such an easy thing for them to tell him, that like a driver is coming up, and that is an easy thing for him to get penalized for, because it's like people get penalized for that every weekend.
Well, and watching the post-race interviews, Laura Winter asked him, hypothetically in an alternate universe, like if you started on that front row, and he's like, who knows? Like, who knows? But I do think, like I said at the start, towards the start of the race, I was like, man, if he had started in second and Lando, like, he would have been on the podium.
I think so.
Yeah. So, that was, like, a little frustrating, but I feel like there's always, like, a penalty that we get frustrated by before the race. So, yeah. So, the grid placement ended up being Max, Lando, Charles, Oscar, Carlos, George, Yuki, Lewis, Danny, and Hulkenberg. So Danny actually ended up not in 10th.
Well, and I know that Haas actually had come with upgrades, but only on Hulkenberg's car this weekend.
Interesting. Maybe that also.
They're trying different things out. A lot of teams will do that where they only bring it on one car and not the other. So like last weekend in Miami, Lando had the McLaren upgrades.
But
Oscar did not. Which is unfortunate for Oscar. Time to get into the race.
Fernando ended up starting from the pit lane, even though he was in almost dead last.
P19.
He ended up starting from the pit lane because
I want them to show us a car actually start from the pit lane. Like, what does it look like? Are they at the very end of the pit lane, and then they just start once everyone goes past them? Or, like, are they sitting in their garage?
I'm sure if you watched the beginning of Fernando's driver cam, you would know.
Oh, that would be really simple and easy to look up. I've never thought about... Okay, never mind. I'm going to...
Let
you finish talking.
So, Fernando started from the pit lane due to late setup changes to the suspension. Honestly, I just felt like his entire weekend was just misery.
I want to give that man a hug.
But, sometimes you win some, and sometimes you just...
Get fed to the lions.
Get fed to the lions, and your brakes set on fire. I will say, for knowing that this was one of those tracks where they were like, it's hard to pass, it's narrower, because that's the thing, the older tracks are narrower. It was a clean start.
Yeah, and I feel like usually if it's a hard track to pass on, people go a little crazy in the start because it's like, this is my chance.
I need to get there, because if I don't get there, I'm never getting there.
Yeah, we're all bunched up. This is my chance to play bumper cars and get ahead. And it was completely clean. And the top 6 stayed in the top 6 order.
Yeah.
Max and Lando had the exact same reaction time. There was a moment there where I thought Charles was going to pass Lando on the inside of that front turn, but no, they were totally fine.
It was funny, though. I'm curious, and I didn't look this up, because I think they did have a almost, like, impeccably close start reaction. I'm curious to see how fast the cars started versus each other, because I do feel like the Red Bull was able to get ahead faster than the
It might have a better, like, actual start, the car.
Yeah. Checo was able to move to 10th, passing Danny, and then by lap 4, Max had increased his gap to over a second, which was honestly a little disheartening for us, especially after Miami, when, like, the gap was,
Yeah.
So, it sucked because it was like, oh god, are we back in, like, that Red Bull
It happened
glory
once.
where...
It was like Singapore last year, where it was like, finally, someone's going to compete with Red Bull, and then it was like, oh, never mind.
Yeah, so because the way the top 6 settled, and I feel like we've found this with, like, either Mercedes or felt like it was, like, McLaren for a bit, I feel like certain teams end up in these, like, no man's land world, and that was kind of how people were referring to Mercedes, because it did feel like when people pitted, there was a lot of action, it did feel like
they kind of
Lewis and George, like, settled and just, like, nothing really happened. And I will say, I feel like the same way... I feel like the same thing happened with Charles this weekend. Yeah. Where Charles ended up with, like, a big gap in front of him and a big gap behind him and just stuck.
Did you see what Toto Wolff said about this weekend?
No.
He said, I think it was either qualifying or the actual race results, both Mercedes came in at P7 and P8. And he goes, that's not something to be proud of.
Oh my god, the way my, like, heart just started racing out of, like, anxiety from, like, our past coaches.
Yeah. I was like,
Oh, my mental health doesn't need that right now.
Weird thing to say.
There was I have the weird Carlos thing to tell you at the end of this.
Oh, tell me in a bit. We'll get there. So yeah, Max was the lead car by over a second, and actually Lando had both Ferraris that were creeping up on him because Oscar was behind the Ferraris at this point. And at lap 8, Oscar was trying to find a way past Carlos. And if you know anything about the history between these two people, typically Carlos enjoys taking Oscar out. Carlos has a vendetta against Oscar. I think it's just been
a coinky-dink. I think it's just happenstance. People think it's purposeful.
I love some good theories about the hatred between them two. Even though I'm sure they're probably totally fine. They're both really good friends with Lando, so I would find it hard to believe that they hate each other. But it makes it really interesting in my head because when they're racing against each other, I'm like, oops, this is just fuel on the fire.
Oh my god.
Eventually, I think Oscar did eventually find a way past Carlos.
He did.
It was pretty clean, too.
Well, he was able to, I don't know if it's under or uppercut, he was able to get out of the pit lanes ahead of Carlos.
Yeah, he undercut him.
So it honestly was, like, the best thing for Oscar and the worst thing for Ferrari.
Yes.
So...
lap 11, Alex came out of the pits with a loose tire. So basically one of the, what is it, the nugs?
Yeah, he said, I think it's nut and not nug, but we'll let that slide. I could be wrong. You might be right.
It is tire nut. It is a tire nut.
He said that the nut was on, but that there was a bit of room, and so I don't know if it was like, there was like a little bit of, he said, I believe, replay, don't really know what that means, unless I heard him wrong. They did ask him post-race, they were like, how quickly were you able to tell that there was something wrong with the tire, and he said, almost immediately out of the pit lane.
That sucks.
So, like, he almost immediately knew, and then it was
slow the whole way around.
So freaking painful. He added like a full minute.
Yeah, it was a full lap onto his time. But he did eventually go back in, and then they just changed his tires overall, and this set was totally fine, and they let him out, but they just kept him out there for data, basically, because eventually later on lap 52, they call him into the pits, and I remember yelling at the TV, I was like, why? There's 11 laps left. He's going to come in P20 anyway, so who cares? Like,
while this was also happening, I think when Alex is able to get back into the pit, Alonso was actually leaving the pit, and this is when we saw Alonso just go, oh god, my brakes are on fire.
And they show his driver cam.
And they show it. And then David Coulthard and John are like, oh, the wind will just, like blow it out. And that was that. So
nothing else.
There's that. I was like, oh, fire! And then nothing.
They were all very calm about it.
I mean,
It just reminds me though of what was
But
it,
think about-
Australia, when Max's entire like brake was on fire and
but
it burst
also
in the
think about
flames.
all of the sparks that are constantly.
Yeah, they're probably not that scared of it.
Yeah.
And then eventually Yuki went into the pit because he was battling Hulkenberg for a while. Yuki went into the pit and he ended up undercutting him. So he came out ahead of Hulk, and Hulk eventually went into the pit and was behind him. So
I feel like the pit strategy
was everything this weekend.
It was the tires were a big part of the last 10 laps, huge part. But I do feel like the pitting strategy had really improved certain people's races.
Yeah.
This weekend.
And this was, for almost everyone, I believe, was a one-stop race. With it being 63 laps, I feel like I would almost always imagine it to be a two-stop race, but I'm not a race engineer, so I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know.
Yeah.
I would love to know, like,
what makes them decide it's a one-stop versus a two-stop?
Yeah, like, if it's based off of, like, track temperature, the way the car's performing, like, data, like, what's the data that they pull to determine?
The actual tires that were brought there and how it's performing on the track.
Yeah. They're probably, yeah.
So we get to lap 16, and Max was already leading by 5 seconds at this time, and I was depressed.
Yeah, while this was also happening, Alex was being investigated for unsafe release in the pit lane, which really, that was another...
And then they eventually gave him a 10-second penalty, and he was already a minute and 20 seconds behind the slowest person on track, his teammate. His teammate wasn't this slow at that point. It was somebody else. But he was the slowest person on track, and so at that point, it's like, why are you giving him a 10-second penalty? He's already a minute and 20 seconds behind.
Well, I do feel like it was, like, another frustrating penalty similar to Oscar Piastri's where, you know, I don't remember seeing Alex Albon's unsafe release, so
The unsafe release was the tire issue. Because it was unsafe to release him with the tire problem.
Oh my god, you're right.
Because the tire could have flown off on the track, which actually, apparently in F2... that shit was happening there's a video of in the pit lane during the F2 race this weekend. Tires are flying around. They're rolling down the pit lane. It was chaos. Absolute chaos.
We'll have to watch that. Yeah, I forgot I was thinking it was another, like, he impeded on another car.
No,
and then I realized it was
the tire
literally
issue.
the tire. Yeah.
Lap 18, Checo actually goes into the gravel, but he's back on track with no issues in P8, but it did give P9, I don't remember who was in P9, I think it was Lance Stroll, a chance to actually catch up to him, but he had enough of a gap in front of him and enough of a gap behind him that didn't really cause any problems. I had just stopped taking notes from here to lap 35 because the rest of the time, it's just like, this person's pitting and coming out ahead of this person or blah, blah. And so for me, that kind of stuff bores me. And I was hungry when I was writing my notes and my brain stopped working. So, Mary Catherine, what happened between lap 18 and lap 35?
All right, so I'm going to jump in. I don't have the most extensive notes, guys, which I'm sure some of you are really relieved by. Lap 21, Max reports that his front left tire was no good. We've seen this all weekend. Max just hated his tires. He hated them. Just could not stand the tire situation. Also, around lap 21, Lando finally pitted. Some people pitted so late. Like, I think Checo pitted... I want to say, like, lap 37, but I also feel like that could be wrong.
Yeah, but I think that some of these people were doing, like, opposite.
They were,
so,
yeah.
Like, they started off on hards, and then they were going for 40 laps, and then pitting and getting mediums for the last 20, where a lot of people did mediums, and then switched to hards relatively quickly.
Yeah. So then around lap 35, Lando couldn't understand the lack of pace. F1 TV played his radio message, and this is when his engineer assured him that they were handling their tires better than everyone. At this point, I feel like around lap 35, a lot of the times were kind of settled in.
Well, I think that a lot of people who were close to other cars were trying to battle it out, and therefore they were, like, screwing their tires.
Well,
so the last 10, 20 laps for other drivers, they didn't have the pace because they just ran through their tires completely.
Yeah.
Not Lando, though.
Charles ended up creeping up to Lando. I think Emma's heart almost imploded.
Well, and Oscar was chasing down Charles.
Yeah, well, and that was the thing, too, is that it felt like there was this moment around 35, 40 where everyone got this second wind, and then all of a sudden their tires just fell apart.
Yeah, everyone got this second wind and we're creeping up on Lando, and Lando hadn't gotten a second wind yet.
Yeah.
And so it was like, oh my gosh, all these people are about to pass Lando, there's something wrong. And then they all started to just not creep up anymore.
Well, and then lap 42, so now we've talked about how Max and Lando, the gap is 6 seconds at this point?
Hold on. My favorite thing to mention first was Charles's race engineer, as he was trying to chase down Lando, goes, "You are the fastest car on track." And as we're watching it, I'm like, this is some manifestation girly type shit. Like him being like, "You are beautiful, you are kind, you are the fastest car on track." Like trying to be like, I will speak this into existence.
I'm pretty sure his time improved.
I know, maybe
affirmations work, guys.
Maybe this is what Charles needs.
Just compliments.
Yeah. Maybe that's what Xavi wasn't doing.
Yeah. So, like I was saying, Lando and Max, the gap at one point was around 6 seconds. Now, around lap 42, everyone has had this second wind. The gap between Max and Lando was now under 4 seconds.
Yep.
So now, lap 42, right?
No.
Well,
so lap 42, the gap between Max and Lando was 6 seconds. And then lap 52, the gap between Lando and Max was
lap
4
52,
seconds.
Thank you. I had a typo.
Yeah.
With 7 laps left, so how many laps is that?
That was 56.
56. So with 7 laps left, the gap is now down to 2 seconds. When I tell you, I think this was the first time watching Formula 1 that my heart was racing.
I was like, this is what racing is supposed to be. This is exciting. This is great.
Because
we don't know who's going to win this one.
It was insane watching the gap just disappear.
Yeah. I love watching a race sometimes when a driver, Lando winning Miami by 7 seconds, it was so satisfying to watch because it was like, finally, you got your first win. This is exciting. Max, when he wins by 20 seconds, I'm not excited because this is boring now for me as a spectator. When it's like this, where the last 10 laps, none of us know who the winner is going to be, that, I think, is great racing for every fan involved because it's exciting. Whether you're a Max fan, a Lando fan, a Charles fan, doesn't really matter. You're just excited to watch this.
I also think, too, seeing that he was able to take off this many seconds with an S in less than 10 laps.
I don't know what was going on with the Red Bull.
I think it does show you, too, how McLaren was in this, solid third position in the season in the constructors' standings. And now it really is. It's I feel like
I think if they can keep this up and Ferrari keeps where they're at, McLaren's going to pass Ferrari in the constructors' championship.
And I think that's where I'm probably going to be paying the most attention right now is at the Ferrari-McLaren gap. Just because of where they're performing, how they're performing.
Yeah, I would agree.
You have Lando second, Charles third, Oscar fourth, Carlos fifth. It's going to get very, very tight and really interesting depending on people's performances. So I'm really excited to see how each team, figures out their car.
Yeah, I would agree.
So
the last bit was George actually pitted for new tires about 5, 6, 7 laps to go so that he could come out and get the fastest lap. He had a good chunk of time between him and the person behind him, so he didn't get passed. He was totally fine. And he ended up getting the fastest lap of the race.
Yeah.
And like we said before, Alex Albon retired with 10 laps left. And Max crossed the finish line only 0.725 seconds ahead of Lando.
Did you see how annoying Max's race time was?
Oh, that's so irritating.
So, Max's race time was 1 hour and 25 minutes and 25.252 seconds.
And he got 25 points.
And he got 25 points. That's weird.
That's some witchy shit.
I was writing it, and I, double checked F1,
That's
too.
That's creepy.
I was okay, cool. And then, I also wanted to just mention the gap between Lando and Charles grew significantly.
Well, and I think
end.
Oscar was just stuck behind Charles because the gap between Oscar and Charles did not change at all, basically, the entire time.
I think Oscar settled.
Yeah, I think he was like, I'm not passing Charles at this point, so why am I going to go crazy?
But Charles was 7.916 seconds back. So I just feel like this race, while I hate to say, I don't want to say it was boring. I feel like the last 10 laps really, like, made it interesting. But I think that there was, like, a lot more just strategizing at the beginning.
Yeah.
I just think it's going to be really interesting, the next handful of
I like
races.
these races. I feel like it hasn't been a boring season because it's just been chaos.
I do think it's interesting, too, because we're getting a different side of, like, Max when he's racing. And I just think that that is really interesting because...
It was very interesting afterwards for him to say into his radio, wow, I had to work for that one.
But,
wow!
I mean...
Don't admit that! Don't admit that you didn't have to work for other ones, though.
But when it's a 25-second gap...
Yeah, but that makes everybody else behind you feel real shit.
I'm sure they're not feeling great regardless. I mean, he won how many races? Like, they know it. I think they've all just discounted him when he's 25 seconds ahead. They're like, he's not even in it with us.
Maybe.
But, I mean, I just think that one is so much history. I do think you can tell that there's a lot of excitement. I mean, a lot of the drivers, if not all of them, are mostly based in Europe. I think it is probably an easier leg of travel for all of them, and I feel like we're getting into it. I mean, it's about to be busy. We got Monaco in a handful of days. But I think the last 10 laps were incredible racing.
Yeah. Agreed.
So,
final thoughts. So, even though this race was slightly boring for some bits of it, I think the last 10 laps were obviously very exciting, and I think when a lot of teams bring new upgrades, it's kind of like the first race of the season where you're just trying to figure things out.
yeah.
And so I think with this being the first European race of the season, it is a bunch of new upgrades from every single team. It's not going to be the most exciting race half the time because a lot of the teams are just trying to figure out, how does this work in my car?
Yeah.
But I really enjoyed the race. I think I really enjoyed qualifying because there were some shockers.
I really liked the track.
I said to my captain, I was like, I think that this would be a really fun track to go to. You spend a week in wine country, going to all these vineyards, and then you end your vacation on the race weekend.
I don't know if it's just... I love, like, Silverstone, Canada, Imola,
I love the
Monza.
historical
I
spots.
think I do love the ones, too, that are in, like, parks.
Yeah.
Like, I really enjoy those as much as I love, like, night street races. They're cool, but they're so bright, it doesn't really, like, from watching it on TV, it doesn't really feel like it's nighttime.
Singapore still feels pretty cool, though.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, but I think that I really love them in parks. Like,
yeah, I like the nature aspect of it.
Yeah, I love that there's trees. Like, you know, Miami needs less boats and more trees.
Well, next week we're not having any trees because we're going to be in Monaco. We're going to be in a city. And we were not fans really last year when Monaco came around. So we've never watched Monaco because when we started to become F1 fans, we went back and rewatched some of the old races from that season. We did not get to Monaco, so this is going to be our first time watching Monaco.
This is our first Monaco experience.
I'm really excited. I know that it's a difficult place to pass just because it is a city street, and the track really was designed for the older cars, where now it's just really clunky. But last year, I'm pretty sure Esteban Ocon was P3. So, you never know. Some wild shit could happen at this race.
And I do feel like recently there's just been some really random shit happening.
Yeah. I do think that when we do our Get Ready episode, it's going to be a little bit different just because of how historical this race is. There's a lot to talk about, so I think we'll probably... I don't know if we're necessarily going to do a driver of the week. We might just do a lot of the history and talk about all of that.
We're going to figure that out tomorrow.
Yeah. You'll see when you listen to
It'll
that
be a
next
surprise,
episode. It's a
but
surprise for us right now.
We're going to try to teach you something.
I mean, I would like to learn a bit more
If
about it.
not, we'll remind you of something you knew once.
True. You might know about it, but we don't. But also next weekend, if you are not in the mood to watch F1, but you want to watch IndyCar, it is the Indy 500 next weekend.
Yeah.
And we also have never watched that before. So if we have the chance to watch it, which I believe we should have a chance to because F1's going to be in the morning and Indy 500 is in the afternoon. So the timing should work out perfectly where if we wanted to watch both, we can. And I've always wanted to go to the Indy 500, but I didn't get a chance when I was in college, so.
I think Chris's Uncle John goes to the Daytona 500, but is that NASCAR?
I think it's NASCAR.
Yeah. Obviously very different. It's down in
Very
Florida.
different.
But, yeah, I don't think I know anyone that's been to the Indy 500.
So, because of the university that I had gone to, a lot of people that I know would go there.
True.
Because classes would end, and then if you lived in Indianapolis or in Chicago, or you just stayed in your college housing for a couple weeks, then the Indy 500 was there. There's
How
also
far outside of the city is the circuit?
It's like 10, 15 minutes outside. I raced, there's Eagle Creek, which is where I would row.
It's over there?
It's
okay.
over, yeah, it's not too far from there. And
Damn, I was over
the
there.
the infield section of the track, there's a big, like, basically music festival that happens there called the Snake Pit. And I know that Dom Dalla is going to be there this year, so it's very big. So I'm a little sad that I'm not going to be there, but I also feel too old for it now. It's a lot of college kids. Can't do it anymore.
It's probably like the Thursday before Derby is like a lot of college kids.
It's kind of like your Wednesday before Thanksgiving.
Yeah.
That's what it feels like.
Yeah.
But in the hot summer, in mud and heat, hearing the loud noise of Indy cars going around. And I actually want to watch the race, not just the concert. So, you've got lots of options for next weekend. We'll talk about everything. Maybe that's what we should do. You focus on Monaco. I'll talk about IndyCar.
I thought you were really gonna assign IndyCar to me, and I was about to be like, all right.
Nope. We'll do an F1 IndyCar episode combined because of how important the races are next weekend.
Well, and I think too they're both
historical
ridiculously historical.
Yeah,
races.
they're so important.
Yeah. Cool. I'm down.
Awesome.
Well, we just figured it out.
You're welcome.
Live.
Now you know.
That's how our process is, guys.
Yeah, usually.
Glad we got to see it.
I think that's everything.
Yeah, I've got nothing else.
All right, follow us on all of our socials, Instagram, TikTok, YouTube, and that's it.
I was like, what else?
And then wherever you listen to your podcasts, Spotify, Pandora,
all right,
Apple
I'm gonna
Music,
wrap it up.
whatever it is. Alrighty, bye guys.
Bye.